Man, this video just did not want to be made. My mic broke and it was a whole thing, but Happy New Year everyone. I am so terribly late and I am sorry. But I thought I'd start the year with a topic that is a bit different than my normal stuff. Today we are diving into industrial music, goth's more political cousin. I first became interested in exploring this video's topic thanks to Electric Body Memes on Instagram, who opened up the conversation in one of their posts. I didn't know that industrial music was strongly rooted in anti-fascism. I did always know that it was anti-stupid people in government, but for some reason it didn't click that those were the same thing.
I am smart. Marty.
In a world that is heavily divided and extremely political, music is a key instrument in helping people seek refuge and sanity in hectic times. But industrial music is completely different. It reaches into uncomfortable topics while delivering hard beats and metallic sounds, and has always been heavily political, but also extremely humanitarian. In this little video essay, we are going to explore the roots of anti-fascism in industrial music by exploring the early industrial bands of the 80s and 90s. If I missed any of your favorite bands, please feel free to put them in the comments below. But hello, I'm Miko, and welcome to my channel where I talk about gothy things and just things I like. And do please take note that I had to change some verbiage to make sure that y'all even saw this video. Thank you, YouTube. Industrial music was named after an inversion of music industry.
Ha! The ironing is delicious. The word is irony.
Unlike punk rock with its direct confrontational lyrics, the messages in industrial music were heavily filtered through tech and machine noises, or whatever other medium was assisting the mix. It could range from synthesizers and distortion pedals to straight up grinding down on an oil drum with a saw. For example, instead of writing songs against oppression by religion, a song could focus on threatening, repetitive samples of TV preachers, followed by lyrical commentary which could be vague or menacingly specific. Using this technique, many bands mocked right-wing, conservative views or advocated for left-wing or libertarian ideas by opening up conversation about the harms and dangers of the far right. They use subject matter regarding mass unaliving, misogyny, and totalitarianism. And though these things were shocking to the conservative powers at the time and were often sensationalized by conservative media, it just made it that much more appealing to the counterculture youth. Not unlike a lot of early punk rock bands, most industrial artists are at least anti-authoritarian, with a common focus on criticizing politics, organized religion, and fascist viewpoints. But they do focus on many different topics, often with underlying humanitarian themes. While music often creates a form of escapism, industrial music brings uncomfortable topics front and center. However, this doesn't come without its fair amount of controversy. Think about Rammstein, quite possibly the most famous industrial band, and how insanely controversial they were coming out of Germany due to their taboo subject matter. Industrial music as a genre is extremely transgressive, like watching a horror film. One does not watch a horror film to feel good, but to invoke fear, disgust, and other deep-set emotions. Confronting these emotions makes the music deeply relatable to the listener, but especially when addressing these sensitive topics. Though many people do enjoy industrial music due to the harsh sounds and intense beats as well, these musical elements are used to amplify the emotion behind the subject matter. Many industrial bands started at a bit of an older age compared to punk rock bands in a lot of other alternative genres, usually in their 20s. They came of age during the 70s and were in line with the counterculture hippie movement of the time. However, instead of basking in the lavish privilege of their parents' fat wallets to go to Woodstock, these were people who were angry and broke.
Bitch, me too! The fuck?
While the economy loomed into recession, the post-war babies were discovering music outside of the tastes of their parents. And in 1976, global oil prices tumbled, unemployment skyrocketed, and punks and industrial musicians alike had plenty to say about it. Having experienced hardships early on, a common theme amongst industrial bands is that they were very well-read and intellectual, many well-versed in politics and gifted critical thinkers. They were artists, writers, actors, and even today, many of the industrial bands that I have gotten the privilege to see and read interviews on are highly intelligent and well-spoken. With many bands starting in Europe in the 70s and 80s, a lot of the people in those early bands had families who were immediately affected by World War II. Family members either fought in the war or had to flee their home countries to seek asylum. So they knew the horrors of war and the effects it had on people in every way. Even Western countries like America and Canada had a part in the war and were not immune to its effects. You can also see commentary on this in more subtle ways in some goth bands like Sisters of Mercy and the song Lucretia, My Reflection. In the lyrics, hot metal and methadone is a substance given to soldiers during the war to keep them awake and alert during battle. But these soldiers who did come home had even more severe shell shock than those who weren't made to take the substances. And I can only imagine how that affected parents and their children after the war. A band who is credited with distinct influence in not only industrial but synth-pop and post-punk music as well is a band whose name that I cannot even say on YouTube, but it's self-unaliving. But like the non-PG version of that word? You get it, I hope. They were formed in 1970 and set the foundation for the duo formation of many bands to come. One person on synthesizer and one on vocals. Their lyrical content dealt with the breakdown of the American post-war society, which can be seen heavily on their track Frankie Teardrop. This song is about an American factory worker driven to insanity by poverty. Given that the duo was from New York, they would know a thing or two about poverty. Though the song's sparse organ and Vegas-chilling vocals are more gothic in nature, the heart-pounding and shaking drums and rapid tempo are bone-chilling and more akin to industrial. The track can be seen as the roots of many musical genres including synth-pop, post-punk, darkwave, and industrial. Credited as the first true industrial band, Throbbing Gristle formed in 1975 in London and were active until 1981. They are widely viewed as having helped create the industrial music genre along with their contemporaries, Cabaret Voltaire. In fact, the term industrial music was founded in the mid-1970s by Industrial Records, which the members of Throbbing Gristle created. On the band's debut album, The Second Annual Report, they used the phrase industrial music for industrial people, which we did talk about earlier. Throbbing Gristle's song lyrics mainly revolved around mysticism, extremist political ideologies, sexuality, and dark or underground aspects of society. And the music is not easy to listen to by any means. It uses horror elements and disturbing lyrics alongside intense, droning, hard-pan, distorted, and ambient synthesizer tones, and it freaks me out, but you can't deny that their influence was widespread, most notably amongst 90s rock acts like Nine Inch Nails and Skinny Puppy. By using those elements that I mentioned, the band wanted people to think for themselves rather than subscribing to any sort of political ideology. One of the things that made Throbbing Gristle so controversial was their use of fascist imagery during their live shows. But this was a common theme in early industrial music, the practice of taking this fascist imagery and turning it into critique. I definitely don't think that it's an okay thing to do these days. I don't really agree with it myself. But Laibach, who formed in 1980, did use that technique better than anyone else. The band literally took the imagery and repurposed it on their album covers as a political statement against the source. Although they got a fair amount of scorn for it, listening to songs like Wir Personen and Panorama, you can get a decent idea of what they were about in the early 80s. Even without understanding the lyrics, you can tell that it is intentionally difficult, oppositional, militaristic music that at the time was being presented against a backdrop of Cold War oppression in Yugoslavia. Laibach's name is the German name of Slovenia's capital city, Ljubljana. Slovenia wasn't even its own country at the time. While the name dates back hundreds of years, its most recent use was World War II, when the World War II bad guys occupied the area. Even saying the word Laibach in Slovenia at the time was loaded. saying it angered people is a gross understatement. The band couldn't even print the name on their flyers as a result. As the group developed a following and used the media to put out literature and interviews, which thankfully, due to the poorly regulated media of the 80s and zine culture, they were able to reach an international audience. They were able to clarify that they were really pushing the idea that a lot of the things people commonly associate culturally with fascism, notably the concept of totalitarianism, are so ingrained in every society in the modern world that, at the time, people didn't even notice. In an interview with WordPress in 2020, Laibach stated, "In the 8th statement of our 82 manifesto, it says, Laibach practices provocation on the revolted state of the alienated consciousness, which must necessarily find itself an enemy, and unites warriors and opponents into expression of a static totalitarian scream." And this is what we still do. Of course, we believe that in art morality is nonsense. In practice, it is immoral, and in people, it is a sickness, and yes, we are masters of ambiguity with a strategy behind it. We practice transgression and use other tactical weapons and means, as such we feel we need, in order to smoke the listeners and onlookers out of their comfort zones and make evil lose its nerves. The truth is not static and definite, freedom even less so. Therefore, the view, perception, and understanding cannot be fixed to a final, one and only, definition as well. And if this interview is a bit hard to understand, it took me a little bit of a read. Laibach is basically stating that they are ambiguous and so transgressive that they make evil lose its nerves by showing those in line with totalitarianist ideologies the reality of their views. And they do this by putting the horrors of fascist imagery right in front of their faces. But a fun fact about Laibach is they actually got greenlit by the North Korean government to play 2 shows in North Korea, and if that isn't incredibly on brand for industrial music, I don't really know what is. Laibach was also highly influential, inspiring bands like Rammstein and Nachmer who followed suit, although both bands have received backlash over the years. KMFDM and Rammstein stared right at the proverbial Iron Curtain. Hailing from West Germany, though KMFDM was officially formed in France, they do have 2 German members. Germany particularly was very conflicted by the World War II bad guy regime and what it had done to them as citizens. A lot of older people sadly still held on to these views due to intensive propaganda and brainwashing. In an interview with Industrial Nation magazine issue 16, Rammstein guitarist Richard Krusp stated that it's mainly men who call our music fascist, but women and children, they love us. Which I thought was kind of funny because many of Rammstein's songs of that time were about abuse, corpse loving, and other taboo topics. But thinking about my own life, my mom and I just blasted Rammstein in the car when I was a kid, so that checks out. But when you think about the war and the men on the war front, it's easy to see how men in particular would have been against Rammstein. Seeing 6 men, naked and broad-shouldered, could be triggering due to its representation of the white race. This is something that Rammstein was heavily criticized for in Germany, but according to the interview, Krusp said that in other countries, especially America, there was no problem with the album's cover. Additionally, Rammstein's current production aesthetic reflects the band's experience of German reunification. Rammstein was founded as a means for the band members to come to terms with their new German identity. Initially, the band dealt with the shock of reunification and the realities of Western capitalist societies. After all, the Berlin Wall only fell in 1989. Later in their career, the band pursued 2 goals: to improve the history of their country in foreign perception, and to help the Germans make peace with their nation's past. Due to this, Rammstein faces controversy with just about every album they release. The most recent in my memory is the album Deutschland. In the music video of their song Deutschland, while in a future apocalyptic world, the 6 band members are clad in prison garbs of the camps of the past war, while a woman of color, clad in gold, commands an army amongst other imagery of war's past and war's future. The video was highly controversial for 2 reasons, one being the World War II bad guy imagery, and the other being mad that a woman of color is the representation of Germany. But both of these things miss the meaning behind the music. that Rammstein wants to be proud of its nation while also being able to acknowledge the wrongdoings of the past, that it is okay to remember what harm was caused so long as we can lead ourselves to a brighter future. What's strange is Rammstein claims to be anti-political, but KMFDM is staunchly left-wing libertarian, and yes, that is a thing. While 60% of KMFDM songs are about how great KMFDM is, the other 40% is very political and advocates for justice, accountability, equality, and freedom of speech. The name itself is Kein Mehrheit für die Mitleid, loosely translated as No Pity for the Majority, which advocates for minorities, reason, and ethics against fascism and mob rule. Songs like Rules from the X-Door album are warnings against fictional dystopian authoritarian systems, though some songs are more obvious, like Fake News, Bullets, Bombs, and Bigotry, and Terror. Terror by KMFDM has the heart-wrenching lyrics, How much longer do we tolerate mass murder? As a response to Columbine, it brings up an open conversation on anti-violence, gun control, and humanitarianism. And I bring up this song in particular because one of the OG Columbine kids was wearing a KMFDM shirt. This put immense backlash and pressure on the band even though they staunchly advocate for gun control in their music. And of course, it happened again. It breaks my heart that people can take music with intentions to create positive changes and turn it around to fit their narrative. In an interview with CNN, of all news outlets, KMFDM stated, KMFDM are an art form, not a political party. From the beginning, our music has been a statement against war, oppression, fascism, and violence against others. While KMFDM is left-wing libertarian, Ministry's Al Jurgensen is about as left-wing gets. He has always been radical, using his fame to incite conversation as well as rage. I mean, really, you can listen to just about any Ministry album and get an earful of anti-authoritarian, government-criticizing, anti-racist music. Antifa, the first single from America Can't, a biting embrace of the anti-fascist movement that Jurgensen said in an interview with the Spokane spokesman, hadn't been noticed in the United States before the rise of Trump. The whole album is a criticism of the government, how Americans vote against their own interests and elect the uber-rich. Their latest album, Hopium for the Masses, ripped the Trump administration a new one. It features a song titled Goddamn White Trash, which I saw in person before the album was released when Ministry played with Rob Zombie on their Freaks on Parade tour. At the end of the song, they showed a picture of Donald Trump's mugshot. The whole album is critical of the decline of the American, alongside focusing on environmental issues like big oil. These themes are not new for Ministry, as their 1989 album, The Mind is a Terrible Thing to Taste, has heavy themes of political corruption, especially in their song Thieves. Alongside the song Faith Collapsing, which has the repetitive title lyrics alongside a news broadcast, it showcases the band's early warnings against the collapsing faith in the government amongst the average people, while we witness corruption spread rampantly in the 1980s amongst the American political world. Imagine what a different place this world would be if the politicians just listened to what Ministry was saying. Wumpscutt also made a song about Soylent Green, and if you haven't watched this movie, please do, but spoiler ahead,
Soylent Green is people!
The song isn't advocating for the practice of Soylent Green, but calling it out as a possibility for a dark future. You can see this warning in many dystopian movies. Dystopias are reflections of anxieties for the future regarding current issues, which industrial music draws quite heavily on. I also include this song to encourage everyone to support your local farmers. Calling out extremism, Thrill Kill Cult was doing the dark, sleazy, satanic disco with a little sense of humor well before anyone else. By tweaking the conservative satanic panic rhetoric and making it obviously gay, it was so outrageous the album was featured as satanic music on the Christian fundamentalist John Ankerman show. Their music features hits such as Some Have to Dance, Some Have to Kill, and Nervous Ziens, often pronounced Nervous Christians. And the funny thing with that song is, any reasonable Christian who isn't a bigot has no problem with that song or Thrill Kill Cult. It's just flashy, fun, and intentionally so far out there that only extremists can take it seriously. Even if Thrill Kill Cult does sound like horror disco and the albums have no redeeming social value whatsoever, it is wonderful. But most importantly, it brings openly queer imagery into the alternative mainstream, and challenged the ultra-conservative satanic panic by bringing forth catchy and shocking tunes to challenge public perception. The band Leatherstrip is also queer art. Though they never truly define themselves as industrial, their first album is righteously so. The band's early works were responses to the Gulf War with songs about burning oil, stealing, and corrupt people getting away with unaliving and being anti-capitalist. The lyrics are frank, sometimes to the point of being hostile. They have several anti-fascist songs such as Aidi, Aid, and 88. They can also be a little bit of a hard listen, especially if you're not used to that much anger being thrown at you, but they are also a very important part of openly queer music that is important to acknowledge. Of course, you can't talk about industrial music without acknowledging extremism. Bands like Hansel und Gretel, who, with their album Über Alles, seem to be mocking World War II bad guy propaganda and symbolism, arguably went too hard on the irony and began inciting actual fascists. Unfortunately, when you use imagery that is so rage-inciting to be critical, people with ill intentions will interpret it as they want. And instead of using the imagery as a warning, they will use it to incite their own evil ways. And the use of critical imagery in this way is not exclusive to industrial music. Punk also used this imagery as a way to rebel against the silent generation, e.g., their parents. Whether it was just to piss off their folks or used as a rebellion against the erasure of World War II, early punk quite literally emerged in a post-bad guy public sphere. The Sex Pistols, who served as an idealistic portrayal for British punk, were heavily doused in political rhetoric. Ballads like God Save the Queen deplored monarchy and the fascist regime. Both Susie of Susie and the Banshees and Sid Vicious of the Sex Pistols were also seen wearing fascist symbols. But this video is on industrial music. Industrial music has long championed humanist causes, Skinny Puppy being a great example of this. With music that is grown, improvised, and uncomfortable, they excelled in bringing up topics others of their time shied away from. They strongly championed animal rights, gun control, and brought to attention other issues like substance addiction. I think that humanist is the word that I would use to define this genre. When rebelling against something so inhumane as fascism, it is inherently humanist. You want to see a better world for everyone, not just the uber rich. Al Jurgensen was on the Hardcore Humanitarian podcast where he explored his deeper thoughts on human nature, at its core, open-mindedness. It's an interesting listen and a little bit out there, but to summarize, when the song is finished, Jurgensen believes it connects with the universal fundamental. He states, "All I'm doing is receiving their radio waves and putting on the Earth type stamp on it with the noises from Earth, problems and concerns from Earth in the lyrics and agenda, but then I'm sending it right back out into the cosmos for other people to interpret in other places and other galaxies." What emerges is a celebration rather than nullification of humanity, and in celebrating that humanity, Jurgensen reasserts that it is humans rather than machines that provide the most critical element of industrial music, emotion. And emotion is a heavy part of industrial music. These bands come from the children of those in World War II, and while their parents remained silent, they chose to make music reflecting their own beliefs that many people resonate with to this day, and that is the legacy of all these great bands and more. Industrial music for industrial people is a core slogan of the genre, and I think that now, more than ever, we should give industrial music a listen. Like and subscribe if you want, and have a nice day.